The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is a weird sequel. As is tradition for this channel, we can break this down much more than it needs. There's a 3 right there, even though this will be the first and only Witcher game that most people will play. Even if this is their favorite game, most people won't go back to the first 2. Many of them won't even play the DLC for Wild Hunt. And that their part is weird too. Wild Hunt, not the Wild Hunt, which is how the group is always referred to in the books and games. Just Wild Hunt, because repeating the twice in the title would be visually and audibly awkward. Even weirder is that the Wild Hunt is barely in the game. They are undoubtedly important to the plot and do serve as the game's major antagonistic force, but their screen time is shockingly low for something that is placed in the title. The last pieces are the colon, which are inherently odd and the butt of many wordplay jokes in the literary world, and as we all know, Witcher is a weird word. Welcome to the third and final video on the Witcher series. If you're starting with this one, I suggest that you consider watching the first 2 videos before this. I don't actually suggest you watch them, because their combined runtime is over 9 hours, but I do suggest that you consider it. Maybe you'll go back to them if you enjoy this after you clicked out of morbid curiosity to see how someone could speak this long about a video game. The Witcher 3, with the DLC included, which is something this video also covers of course, can easily take you 150 hours to finish. That's long enough to watch the new Dune movie 60 times. Yes, that is how long ago I wrote that line. My first playthrough took just under 200 hours. Long video games tend to be closer to the scope of fantasy novels when it comes to story. Even if voice acted, they include hundreds of thousands of words of text. I believe Witcher 3 is close to 500,000. Another comparison would be an entire trilogy of movies instead of just one, which also brings with it the need for cinematography, music scores, and sometimes even physically acted performances that the in-game movements are based on. After all of that still comes arguably the most complicated thing to analyze: gameplay systems. These can layer over each other in interesting ways, and in the case of Witcher 3, there's also a game within the game that many players enjoy. All of this has to be considered when critiquing a video game. In addition to speaking on those topics, this video also includes a discussion of the books that these games are based on by Andrzej Sapkowski, how they serve as a foundation for the game, and how they are still relevant 3 entries into the series. In fact, they could be seen as more important than ever. There's lots to speak about on the continuing story from Witcher 1 and 2 to here, the introduction of Yennefer and the final best girl showdown she has with Triss, the real secret protagonist Ciri, and a quick foray into Thronebreaker, which is a surprisingly long game with choices just like the rest of the series. But right now, I just want to give people what they want, even though I don't approve of it. Whether I like it or not, I am aware that some people view my videos as a source of validation, despite the fact that the only thing I am an authority on are my own feelings, and there's still a ton of internal disagreement I have on those. Some people come to these videos looking to see me hate on a game so they can feel more secure about also hating it, or more justified if I end up loving it. This isn't how you should use these videos at all, and it's really frustrating to me when people do that. Agreeing or disagreeing with me should be a surface level consideration or just an amusement, and the focus should be using the arguments and supporting evidence in the videos as a way to explore your own opinions on the topic, or learning about a game that you don't know anything about and are using this as kind of like a commentary, quick look at something that you haven't played before. But nevertheless, I am aware that many people are coming into this video curious to see if I'm going to hate on the popular game or rave about it, especially given the cybernetically enhanced elephant in the room that now hangs over every word I say, right next to the bungee jumping anaconda that represents how long this series has become. What a goddamn circus. I hate this game, is what some people want to hear. This game is so overrated that it's made me realize how unduly harsh I've been to other games. Super Mario Odyssey is a masterpiece. Soma is now a horror game. The Uncharted series is only great. Breath of the Wild has just the right amount of Zelda, and I get inside now. The Witcher 3 is not a perfect game. If it wasn't for the DLC, it would be my least favorite of the trilogy for reasons we are about to spend too much time going through. But it would still be a game I enjoyed and respected greatly. It would still be worth playing. It is, out of all of the games I have played, the best at something, and is therefore absolutely worth your time if you're interested in seeing what video games can do. Exploring the current peaks of quality within an art form is always a worthwhile experience. Witcher 1 has one of the best narratives in any game I've come across, although you have to get through a lot of awkwardness to get to the ending that gives the story its final tap to crystallize the whole thing into a jewel worth admiring. Witcher 2 has the best attempt at branching narrative choices with consequences that I have ever seen, and is also therefore very important if you care about deconstructing video game stories, even if it is kind of a chore to play. And Witcher 3 has the most immersive, best presented open world in any game of this type that I have played. A better one might exist somewhere. I haven't played every open world game, but I doubt it. In the same way that Breath of the Wild offers you the best open world that allows you to sink into it for exploration through gameplay, Witcher 3 allows you to soak in a captivating place that is brimming with detail, beauty, sometimes of the horrific variety, and sets you free to get lost in it all through the wonderfully odd lens of being a Witcher. For some, the more recent Assassin's Creed games may hit at a higher mark. They didn't for me, but it is worth pointing out that if Witcher 3 is your favorite game in more ways than one, chiefly for gameplay, then you are doing yourself a disservice if you haven't also enjoyed those recent Ubisoft titles. Creative inspiration is often cyclical, as we can see, from Witcher 2's reference to that series now building off Witcher 3's success. It goes without saying that Witcher 3 was similarly influenced by some of those past games too, and with a hearty helping of World of Warcraft of all things, a game that sadly seems to be in its dying days, long past its glory. A similar shadow looms over us now at the end of this introduction. The elephant's trunk is dangling and making odd whirling noises, clearly in need of a Ripper Doc's attention. Because if there was one game that could have topped Witcher 3's best success, its sumptuously crafted open world, it would have been Cyberpunk 2077. And if it wasn't for the 2077 glitches in that game, I think it would have. If it's ever patched up properly, it still might. And depending on when this video comes out, it might have already, and I need to play it again. Regardless of its current state, the original launch of Cyberpunk 2077 was a victim of CD Projekt's mismanagement. I don't have any insider information about this, it's just plainly obvious. Either they pushed it out the door too early when it needed more time in its final phase, or they ran out of budget to fully realize the scope. Either way, that's a failing of management to keep the project under control. How high up the management line does this problem lie? I have no idea. That's where it stops being obvious. And this is all so rich coming from me, I know. What year is it? I've played over 300 hours of Cyberpunk 2077. It's changed a lot about how this video series has been produced, and I also think it's changed how people view CD Projekt Red, and maybe even how they view Witcher 3. Because whether or not Cyberpunk 2077 was disappointing, it was also a victim of Witcher 3's success, and a self-inflicted, it's super effective hype frenzy that hurt itself in confusion. Expectations are supremely powerful, and it would be an act of ignorance to forget how Witcher 3 was seen as an underdog competitor to Bethesda's Skyrim as it was being launched. How long ago that was, huh? Compared to Cyberpunk's status as a preem, unrivaled entry in the gaming landscape. And make no mistake, Choom, expectations have also played a prominent role in how I fretted over finishing this video. The awkward note I have to end on here is that Witcher 1 was a janky mess with some great stuff underneath. Witcher 2 was a janky mess with some great stuff underneath. Cyberpunk was a janky mess with some great stuff underneath. Whereas Witcher 3 seems to be the odd one out. Less jank, more great stuff. Right? That's how people tend to view it. Well, as we're about to see, maybe not.
Ciri came out of Brokilon with me. I sent her back to her grandmother then. But already I felt bound to her.
By destiny.
By something more.
There's something that I've been internally debating with myself for years, trying to decide what time slice of an experience is the most important. This doesn't really apply to visual art and music, but when it comes to longer works of art like movies, and especially games and books that typically have to be consumed over multiple sessions, it's worthwhile to try to figure out which part of it is the most vital. And I'm speaking quite generally here, and I mean when things are broken up into the typical three pieces: the beginning, the middle, and the end. Most of the time, the answer I settle on so my mind will shut up and I can finally go to sleep is the same answer to that riddle about going on an adventure. Which step of a journey is the most important? The answer is the current step, because that could be your first step, and if you mess up, it could also be your last. But I've always been unsatisfied with this, even if it should be an acceptable answer. It comes across as both semantic and pedantic, you know, the best kind of dicks. But for stories, it should also make sense, right? The current page could be the first page, and any page in the middle could be the final page if your reader is so put off that they don't come back. If they do make it to the actual ending, then it needs to be satisfying to make the journey getting there worth it. Poor endings can spoil your feelings about everything that came before, even if you were previously enjoying it, and can retroactively make it a waste of time. Just like a great ending can elevate your opinion to new heights if it really strikes you with awe in the final pages. So are endings the most important then? They seem to most determine how reactions change from a liquid into a solid. Well, even if you do agree that endings can change so much, which you might not, the point still stands that you have to get there first. You have to get through the much longer middle part, which is the bulk of the story. Surely the part of the story that has the most content should be the most vital to get right. It's the majority. It has to build off the foundation laid in the beginning, and it also has to set up the payoff at the end. But readers aren't going to get to the middle, never mind the conclusion, if they aren't drawn in by the opening. The beginning is where hooks are baited, laid out, and hopefully chomped on. This is also true for YouTube videos where at this point in the duration, almost half of the people who clicked have already turned off. See you later. Surely the beginning has to be the most important part then, if nothing else can even be presented to eyes and ears if it isn't good enough. This is also a common stopping point for me, and others. It feels right. Some of you may actually agree with this so much that what I say next won't be persuasive at all, but I want to argue that this is an oversimplification and isn't always applicable. There are many reasons why a bad beginning could be ignored. The strength of a concept, or an artist's involvement that you really enjoy, or it's part of a series that ended well with its previous entry, or the creator has earned the right to have a slower opening from past successes that presumably did have better beginnings. A friend gave it a strong recommendation, and now you've been guilted into watching a show through a long protracted harassment campaign that involves asking you if you started the show yet at the beginning of every conversation you have with them, and another reminder to do so at the end. Or maybe you just paid money for the thing already, so goddammit, are you going to finish it? In these ways, the beginning can actually become the least important. So if there are many ways that an audience can get through a poor opening, then is the middle the most important? Or is it the end? When will this end? Right now, actually, because here's the current answer that I've settled on. Each part is equally important, but in their own specific ways. The beginning of a game or story is where most people will decide if they like something or not. The middle is where most people will decide if they love something or not. And the ending is where most people experience a huge modifier on their current feelings. If the ending is great and they were already loving it, they're now catapulted to the level of fanaticism. If the ending was bad after loving it, well, maybe they're back to just liking it again and hope the sequel is better. If they were hating it and the ending is abysmal, totally justified superiority complex that could be such a strong catharsis that they might loop back around to having a good time again because they feel so wonderful that the ending was as bad as they expected after hating the middle section.
Knew that was gonna be a shitty story.
If you dislike the middle but the ending was good, then you might find yourself in a strange place where you will start going through the experience again looking for hidden positives because of the conflict this has caused. Clearly these last two are insane, and I have never done either of these things, ever. And neither have you. No way. So, like, love, rave, or dislike, hate, loathe, and the potential for flipping between them, like a trail of pick and mix cognitive dissonance treats. I understand I'm still generalizing, but generalizing can be lots of fun and act as a gateway to deeper thoughts on how games and stories work. I generally recommend it. Beginnings are still undeniably important, and I'm going to argue that much of Witcher 3's success was founded in its brilliant execution of its introduction. Then it capitalized on that by managing to stay interesting for most of its middle, and for me personally, how it was able to dazzle me at the end with the DLC Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine. Because the base game ending sure does leave a hell of a lot to be desired. There are two quick things I need to say before we get into Witcher 3's opening. The first is my contractually mandated spoiler warning for the games, DLC, books, and some scenes from the Netflix series. It never feels right to continue without these, even though the video's length should be enough. And the second is that I want to say that I did not play this game at release. It's the only game in this trilogy that I didn't play until much later, with the patches and added content and expansions all installed. I cannot speak about the state of this game at release like I could about Witcher 1 and 2, although I will make some educated guesses about it later on. My perspective is slightly limited because of this, and you should be aware of that. It's also strangely humbling to finally be making this because the computer I built to create my very first video on Dark Souls 1 way back in 2015 was also built to run Witcher 3 on medium settings. It was meant to be the fun part of that PC build. Here's the new work to try, here's the new game to play. Little did I know that the work would end up overtaking everything else, and it would be years yet and a few more PC builds too before I would be able to play the game I wanted to play so badly back then. So while it may be hard to believe, this has been an even longer time coming than you know. Witcher 3's introduction has to be working on multiple levels to match the different audiences that are going to be feeling out if the game is worth their time. Those who are brand new to the series and world, which turned out to be the majority, those familiar with the first games but not the books, and those who read the books, know the world and history, and probably played the first games too. After the game was incredibly successful, you could also add in people who are playing just to see what all the fuss is about, and most recently those who wanted to try the game after the Netflix show pushed The Witcher in front of, apparently 76 million people, most of which with fresh eyes that were audibly heard saying, "What the hell is a Witcher?" when they saw it on their show list. The Witcher 3 enjoyed a renaissance of sorts, like a second launch with dramatically increased sales because of this. At any point in this game, you can think of how it has to operate for these three different audiences, building intrigue while also introducing things to newcomers, but not so plainly to bore the established audience. Developing on past events and characters with enough dynamism that returning players are engaged and feel like their past investment has been worth it, but without being confusing and overwhelming to the new people. And on top of that, like a second, even higher tightrope to walk above the cyberpunk elephant and anaconda, there's trying to keep book readers happy without cascading down confusion to both the people who only played the games and those who are just happy to be here. If this sounds like a narrative nightmare of a task, then you are following along just fine, and you earn double points if you realize these videos have to operate like that too, although the way the Witcher series is presented lets the writers have a few extra techniques to ease the pain. The first few scenes expertly weave multiple meanings together, often layered over each other at the same time so that the different audiences are satisfied. Sometimes for very different reasons, and the one strength that the game can always lean on when times get tough is its visuals. This game still looks incredible 6 years later, or even, just adding this hypothetically just in case, 10 years later, maybe with ray tracing. There are very few games that have surpassed it, especially if you give an equal weighting to art direction. Witcher 3 is one of those rare games that mixes a high level of graphical fidelity with style as well. It's probably the first game that CD Projekt felt they had finally achieved their lofty goals when it comes to presentation. The game shines. So, 2 movies to start. One that is a quick introduction to how the world of The Witcher works. Land of monsters and magic, conjunction of the spheres, kings and queens and their kingdoms, and Witchers. All delivered by a ranting lunatic in the streets that in modern times would be someone approaching you with a clipboard and wants to tell you how much they either love or hate Joe Rogan. This is actually important because it's a little unreliable. It's given to you as a helpful introduction, but it's framed in a way that gives it plausible deniability, which in a way is another introduction to how the stories in games work. Contrast this to the next movie where Geralt is tracking Yennefer's flight through a battleground as two armies clash, and you can immediately tell that this is a much more objective presentation of what really happens. But the way that Geralt is finding these tracks still gives it a slight hint of inaccuracy. Sure, there's no way that he could be able to see all these things that Yennefer did just from the tracks, but is this a reliable account of what happened that's being just shown to us, the viewers, or is it the imagination of Geralt at work as he works through it? Which brings us to welcoming back the nightmare creature of vague, uncertain truths from the Witcher 2 video, which had pieces of it scattered around for perceptive people to find and assemble. This isn't just a joke, it's a core part of understanding how these stories are presented. You are never shown the whole thing. Some parts are either left out or there's a framing to the narrative. Someone is telling the story to someone else, and within that story, someone else might start telling someone else something, and you sink another layer deeper. What you do as a player is the only thing you can take as reliable. And even then, there might be some exceptions. Anything else that's presented to you needs to be thought of as a bit intangible. Not to mention the unwillingness of the stories to give many solid facts about timelines and history. I think the intent here, as paradoxical as it may seem, is authenticity. This is how our world works too when it comes to present events and what we're told occurred in the past. Sometimes I don't like this about the Witcher books and games. Sometimes I don't think a usage of it is even intentional, and sometimes I fucking love it. One of the strangest things to note here, as we're about to sink into Geralt's dream, is that Witcher 3 has a story that is both enhanced and ruined by reading the books it's based on. You can't fully understand the story without reading them, and I know some of you might have just had a visceral reaction to what I just said. Joe, I understood the story just fine, what the hell are you talking about? And yeah, I'm not going to argue that you didn't understand the events Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri all go through and the feeling of struggling against a wild hunt, but see all this here? The place you're taken to in a quest in the last act of the game where you meet with the important elf painting in this garden overlooking the city? This is Earth, and if that doesn't demonstrate in the space of 3 words that book knowledge can shatter your perception of the game's events, then I don't know what will. I do have to quickly qualify, hopefully before someone pauses the video to type out a comment, that there is no line in the books that says, "And then they went to Earth, which was now being fought over in an ongoing war between elves and unicorns." It's only heavily alluded to with a gut punch of a scene when Ciri finds an immense graveyard of human bones and is told these are the remnants of the people the elves stole this world from. It is possible this isn't Earth, but from how I understand the history of this fictional universe, unless there's some really heavy time travel shenanigans, I can't see how it couldn't be. And in case you didn't watch the other 2 videos in this series or read the books yourself, Earth is actually in this universe, so I'm not just riffing here on the details. See, most information is distorted in some way, especially the most powerful revelations, as if they're something that are too strong to look at directly. Like when you cut your finger and are too afraid to look because what if it's really bad? And acknowledging it is what's going to make it real. You want to cherish those fleeting moments before you might have a big ordeal to go through. These moments have to be diluted like that to make them digestible. We're going to be talking about this a lot more later, along with how reading the books can ruin the story in Witcher 3. Right now I want to show how these differing levels of knowledge can change how you perceive this opening, and the best way is to say the name of the woman sitting on a chair in the scene that YouTube might demonetize this video over. I can't say whether many people who played the other 2 games first, and then this one at release, thought this was Triss and then were gobsmacked when it wasn't. But what I can say, almost for sure, is that the visuals here are clearly trying to elicit that response out of those players, and maybe the game's trailer ruined this moment for them. The woman's face is meticulously kept out of frame, and her hair is hidden perfectly under a towel until the reveal that it's jet black, not the famous flaming red, and that this isn't Triss at all, it's Yennefer, and everything you knew about Geralt from the first 2 games may have been a big lie. Geralt loves this woman, they're this comfortable with each other, they're sharing a room, a life, he's being teased with magic, they have a daughter training downstairs, Geralt is a father? What? Who is this girl? Vesemir was involved in this too? He knew and didn't say anything? Gamers at this point would be very confused, as they often are. The betrayal! This is one of the most shattering moments of the entire series, and it could be well worth playing the first 2 games just for the strength of the emotion you might feel, even if it's a mixed one. Games very rarely draw that kind of reaction out of you, after all. Readers, the smug assholes as they are, will be happily following along, probably excited to see where the continuation of Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri will be taken after the sudden ending from the books. This is a lovingly recreated scene from Blood of Elves, when Ciri is taken to the Witcher's castle home for safety and teaching. The most astute and smug among the readers will be tutting and waving fingers though, ready to chastise CD Projekt in their review when they point out that Yennefer was never at Kaer Morhen for any of Ciri's training, and that they're not sure about who they think they are by taking such stretched artistic liberties with Andrei Sapkowski's source material, and then they'll be preemptively chastised first when this is revealed to be a purely fictional dream, not a recalled memory, and that Geralt points out the error before they can.
I was relaxing in the tub, and next to me,
Triss?
Yennefer. Funny, isn't it? She's never been there.
Sometimes you gotta love a writer setting up a facade and then trolling their own audience. If you're completely new to this series, then the visual feast is going to be doing the heavy lifting to get you through this. From the impressive transition from the pre-rendered Crystal Raven skull to the one in-game, then the luxurious interior of the room in Kaer Morhen. If you've already bought the game and it looks this expensive, then it's gotta be worth a few hours of your attention at the very least. Geralt's naked introduction is also quite striking and definitely memorable, if nothing else for how mature it is in a way that is rarely discussed. It's casual nudity. They're not naked here because it's a sex scene or as titillation, although it may function like that for some, but because people are naked sometimes. Even you, viewer, are sometimes in your natural, naked, lazy state. Maybe even right now, you go you. There's something refreshing about this in a way that most games rarely are, most media in general actually. That's not to say that Yennefer and Geralt are not attractive, or that the scene isn't uplifted by having attractive people on display, but remember it's both a man and a woman, with the man more prominently peacocked, which is also unusual. To the point that the tub pose is so iconic that there's a figurine of it, which I have. There's a history of violence on Geralt's body. If you're new, then the sheer amount of scars is going to be noteworthy, and a scar is always an unanswered question that you may be too afraid to ask. If you're not new, then you may be surprised that Geralt is more handsome than ever. In Witcher 1, he looks like a necromancer's pet corpse. In Witcher 2, he's an odd-looking human with some handsome features that almost exactly looks like how I imagine Geralt in the books. In Witcher 3, he's transformed into Danger Dill 4000, and it's no longer just the legends of superhuman stamina and infertility that make you understand why he has a reputation for sleeping with 2 women for every monster that he kills. The Netflix series continues this beautification progression for each new adaptation, with Geralt now being portrayed by literally the most attractive man on the planet. I wouldn't go as far as saying I'd go gay for Henry Cavill, because I don't think it needs to be said, but I do wonder sometimes if Geralt being such a beloved character has caused this change over time. It's like our combined belief and adoration of a fan favorite has manifested into a physical change. This is, quite amusingly, very fitting for the power of belief and magic in the Witcher universe. What's even better looking is the view from the room's balcony. Like the Uncharted games before it, Witcher 3 earns the right to complement itself, and I think this is where the genius intent of this section clicks into place. This dream didn't have to happen, and if it did, it didn't have to be here in Kaer Morhen. And if it did, it didn't need to be in the best room in the castle with the best view of the entire mountainside, but it is placed here to give you a shotgun blast of beauty so strong that I doubt many can resist the urge to already want to go exploring. What a jump from Witcher 2, which was already a jump from Witcher 1, which if you played just strengthens the feeling of awe you'll have here as you see this updated version of Kaer Morhen. Yennefer and Ciri are here to introduce them as important characters immediately. Vesemir is here to reintroduce him because even if you've played the games, you haven't seen him in a long-ass time and probably forgot. Their characterizations are pitch perfect from their book counterparts. Yennefer is outwardly cold but inwardly warm, visibly vain but sharply and secretly insecure. Ciri is bold, talented, bratty, quick in every way, and still not impressing Geralt. This pendulum training exercise is for a mutated Witcher, not a runaway princess, and she still handles it well, recovers from a mistake, all while blindfolded, and Vesemir is a bit bumbling and perpetually worn out but still lethal underneath his age. This all transitions smoothly from a movement tutorial with the built-in justification for letting Ciri win if you don't get a good handle on the controls right away, to a lecture about combat from the same Witcher that is going to be right there with you when you wake up into the game's first real fight. Magnificently done, and I haven't even mentioned the Wild Hunt invading the dream at the end, in such a way that was poignant for me personally because this kind of odd detail when Geralt sees a tear in the training dummy and realizes that they've been unknowingly practicing on a disguised corpse is exactly how nightmares invade my own dreams. I have a sleep disorder that means I dream vividly almost every night. I get regular nightmares too, and more often than not they slither into dreams just like this, with a seemingly benign detail that, only when acknowledged, pounces into a nightmare. A soccer ball will bounce out of nowhere from a door that I swear was just closed, and when I look at it, suddenly the screaming thing is back for its latest episode of Torments. This was a tutorial and introduction all in one, visually captivating for newcomers, an enthralling subversion of the first 2 games for returning gamers, and a pledge of allegiance to the source material with huge production values backing it to readers. It works smoothly and soundly on every level simultaneously and continues to fire on all cylinders for the rest of the game's opening, the miniature open world of White Orchard. And hey look, another gorgeous vista. Season's greetings from Witcher 3. And greetings to the second tutorial. It's a lot longer this time and hides it quite a bit better. White Orchard is the type of starting zone that acts as an encapsulated version of the entire game that comes after it. So you have a main quest to do with some side piece distractions and a more contained area to explore. The intent here is to introduce everything the game has to offer without being patronizing about it, but also scaling everything so far down that it isn't overwhelming. Everything about White Orchard is kept tight enough to fit in your head, and yet it still feels like a large enough space that you can get lost for a few minutes, have fun exploring, and then get your bearings. Learn combat, learn how dialogue flows, learn how to use the map, follow quests, you get the idea. What's most interesting about this section for me that it shows immediately how things have changed from the previous 2 games. It's been 6 months since the events of Witcher 2, and therefore around a year and a half since Geralt was carted in half-dead to Kaer Morhen. You will only ever be given hints about what has transpired in these 6 months, even when it comes to Triss's absence. No flashbacks or solid details on how Geralt ran into Vesemir, only a couple of hints to the antics they have gotten into as they search for Yennefer. This is one of the examples of a good use of the iceberg style of storytelling where you only see a small section of what has happened. Would it be fun to see these 6 months? I think so. A whole game of Geralt and Vesemir being grumpy father and son monster hunters sounds like a great time to me, but for this game and this story, it's not important. It's a setup situation instead for launching us into Witcher 3, and it works. It works in other ways as well. At the end of Witcher 2, Geralt shrugged off his shackles of amnesia and became something new, something more, something close to his book character, but with the new game Geralt stirred in. If you played the first two games, you may expect there to be a guiding hand here that is controlling Geralt, steering him one layer above Geralt the Witcher, steering Roach the horse. But no, it's the opposite. Vesemir is here in service to Geralt. Our Witcher is the one setting the terms now. It's like when Julia Stiles says it's the scary version if the one giving orders to Jason Bourne is himself. No more manipulative Triss, no Kingsman bullshit. Geralt is large and in charge, and his needs are personal ones. Find his sort of wife, find his sort of daughter. This is freedom you feel in gameplay too, even down to the fundamental way you navigate the world. I don't think this was on purpose though, it's just a happy accident. I don't think CD Projekt thought it would be poetic if after Geralt regains his memories and freedom that he can wander around more, so let's invest all we have into making one of the most expansive and expensive open world RPGs of all time. Just because it fits so well. The desire to make a big open world game must have come first, and when the opportunity finally came, it just so happened that it aligned very nicely with Geralt's character development from the previous game. Or maybe not. Maybe this is one of the rare cases where it really was planned. Smaller scoped games while Geralt has amnesia, big open world one that tries to continue the personal story of Geralt and his weird family when the company's means can finally fund that ambition. It does fit ever so well, and not just in this way. Consider that in Witcher 1 and 2, despite the weird word being right there in the title, you don't do mostly witchering. Of course it is present, but the majority of the non-optional main storyline stuff could have been accomplished by any knight or experienced fighter. And this is demonstrably true because Geralt doesn't even have his witcher memories for most of it and is just winging it at every problem. It's mostly the side stuff, the fillery stuff that has you doing witcher work. Don't get me wrong, it is still important that Geralt is a witcher for those stories to work, and he does kill a fair amount of monsters in the main story, but the main goals of both games involve tracking down human enemies while maneuvering awkwardly through political tug-of-war matches. The exception here is Chapter 4 in Witcher 1, and this is what Witcher 3 feels like for almost the entire game, in varied settings of course. It's almost entirely Witcher fantasy fulfillment, with the main quest being about Geralt's personal needs and concerns as a lure to weave you through it all. The books and games both mention that a witcher traveling looking for work is called being on the path, or the trail, or the road, and that's what Witcher 3 is for the majority of its playtime. Visit places that have problems with monsters and ghosts and curses, and use your witcher ways to help those in need while getting enough of a reward for it that you can continue funding your journey. That's the goal, and Witcher 3, in structure at least, achieves this. Due to the open world freedom in this game, this is the first opportunity ever to act out Geralt's life as it is portrayed in the first two Witcher books, which are a collection of short stories about him going to places and solving problems and or getting into some intimate drama with another character while he's there. For many people, Witcher 3 is a dream game come true for facilitating this kind of experience. It's such an appealing concept that I'd wager many people fell in love with it, and Geralt himself, even if they were brand new to the series. I'm a supernaturally mutated warrior that rides around, gruffly taking tasks, killing monsters, and getting paid for my trouble. I get to waltz into a tavern, swing the doors open as if to announce my entrance like it's a Wild West saloon, and mosey on over to someone in need and get caught up in a story. Cool shit, what's not to like?
Saw the notice. Let's say I'm interested.
If you include the Wild Hunt as a monstrous force, which the game seems to because you have to use a silver sword on them, then even the main story does a better job at keeping things focused on Witcher work. Virtually every stage of the way is saturated with dark spells and twisted creatures, even when you're ostensibly working toward finding Ciri. In fact, there's only one section of the main quest that consistently doesn't make you feel like a Witcher, and it's considered by many to be the lowest point in the game, despite taking place in the best part of it. See, now you have to keep watching to find out what the hell that means. I don't even do it on purpose, this just flows out of me. White Orchard, on the other hand, immediately gives you a big monster contract, a griffin that's terrorizing the area, and also shows you it right away shortly into your first ride with Vesemir. This is exquisitely bundled with the goal of finding Yennefer and showing you the current state of the world. Nilfgaard has invaded from the south, as we saw in the final cinematic in Witcher 2, and the northern kingdoms are now at war. Temeria has been conquered, and it's those Nilfgaardian invaders, not the local Temerian authorities, that are hiring you to kill the Griffin. Your Witcher work may be the focus, but it's still unavoidably tangled in the political state of the land. It's also the only way to get information out of the Nilfgaardians to find Yennefer. In order to proceed, you have to be a Witcher.
I'm no executioner.
Almost every interaction here functions on more than one level like this one does. This is your current lead on Yen of Ven. It's a strong example of what routine Witcher work is like, and it also shows you how life has changed for both the residents of White Orchard and the invaders. It may seem obvious that the main quest should work this way, but remember, everything here was a choice someone had to make when making this game without having the benefit of hindsight that we do now. This could have easily been two separate paths, with the locals begging you to save them from the Griffin, the evil invaders refusing to lend a hand or even talk to you until you do some Witcher work in the area so they don't have to spare any resources on it themselves, and while the outcome would be the same, the experience would be fragmented and lesser for it, in my opinion. It's not just about condensing things down to save time. Something that I have to stress again is clearly very important to me. Scenes and interactions having multiple meanings and functions is a way to provide depth and complexity when it comes to experiencing them, and it also makes them much more difficult to make. Consider that on top of everything we've went through already, this singular visit to the Nilfgaard encampment also serves as another opportunity to hit home that this world is rarely black and white, despite the Nilfgaardian colors and Yennefer's childish wardrobe choices. Instigators are naturally seen as the wrong or evil side in conflicts. 2 paragraphs ago I called them evil without even thinking about it. Nilfgaard has provoked the war in order to increase their power, and therefore it's so easy to see them as the bad guys, and the people here so wrongfully displaced worthy of pity. But the soldiers didn't decide to start this war, and most of them likely didn't have much choice in the matter when it came to participating in it, which is pretty much shoved in your face in another nearby side quest wherein you find 2 survivors from the opening battle helping each other stay alive despite being on opposite sides. The commander here is a farmer first, and likely feels that his current place in life is as alien as the people around him. Times of war bring with them different rules, and because of forces that demand more power without ever having to personally bloody their hands, people on both sides have to suffer through them. And this is shown here in these interactions and many more like them in the game. This could have just been an officer waiting in a building who coldly demanded you do something for his information on Yennefer and then went back to his paperwork. In many games, that's exactly how plain this would have been. Instead, you get to witness a flavorful conversation between him and a local farmer, wherein he respectfully asks for supplies and tribute, and then agrees to lower than the amount that the local representative offers. The commander is a person, not an entity, and what could have been a routine cog of dialogue in the machine that is the main quest is elevated to something more, and becomes a little short story all of its own. Witcher 3 is full of details like this, and not just in conversations that change over to a scripted camera with dialogue choices. There's tons of them to find out in the world too if you happen to hear people talking, visually pay attention to environmental storytelling, or decide to creep around eavesdropping. Once again, this makes the world feel alive, but they could have been thoughtless lines just there to fill a silence. Instead, they are taken opportunities to make the most of the added immersion and show something instead of telling it. Make it a stimulating exchange about a man deciding to change his name to a Nilfgaardian one so he fits in with the new overlords, and his friend baffled by the absurdity of it. Have a father panic and fret over his child singing a rude song about the Emperor, one that would have previously gotten a proud chuckle because things in Temeria aren't the same anymore. Show that Nilfgaard might be better in some ways than the previous rulers, since they care more about fairness between humans and dwarves, which you see in the conclusion of a side quest about an arsonist lashing out in the village, which is also a reminder that humans are the dominant race and often treat the others like garbage. There's another good exchange here between 2 women that voices how an invading force can be seen so strongly as a dangerously foreign otherness, and that their shared exaggeration of expectations show how desperate they are to make the true reality ahead of them more tolerable by preparing themselves for worse than what's to come. This is one of my favorite side conversations in the game for how well it's written. So far, I have been very positive, and that's because I firmly think that White Orchard is one of the best parts of the game. You can easily spend hours here without noticing on your first time through. This level of quality is not maintained throughout the rest of the game, but it would be a lie to say that it's lost completely. There is a thoughtful level of consideration for almost every interaction, both in side quests and main quests, that you simply don't see in most games. A better way of explaining this would be to say that none of them feel like rough drafts. There are many side quests in this game that I find underwhelming and undercooked in terms of mechanics and storytelling and systems, and sometimes their placement in the world, but there's usually an admirable amount of detail in how they are presented to you, and at least one extra pass over the characterizations of the NPCs you deal with to make them feel like more than empty mission dispensers. White Orchard probably avoids some of these shortcomings by being a tighter play area. In a way, it's not much bigger than Flotsam, and it's definitely not as memorable, but because of the smaller scale, there are more interlinked stories and characters here than in most places in Witcher 3, and they're left for you to slowly notice and piece together yourself. It's not a mind-blowing moment to realize that the hunter you enlist to help you find the Griffin is also linked to some characters in a nearby side quest, through a forbidden relationship he had with a member of a noble family that indirectly contributed to its downfall. Through a knock-on chain of events, this led to the formation of what is now an abandoned village nearby, and a tragedy creating the Noon Wraith that haunts it, which is where Geralt comes in to help clear the place so a sick child can get clean water from the well, because the river water has become too polluted due to dead bodies from the war, which in turn also has a more obvious but still missable link to a herbalist you can speak to for an entirely different quest, one that also loops back to being connected to the Griffin's attacks. See how there's an interplay and a flowing of scenarios and people being involved. It's not revolutionary, but it still makes the place feel more alive, and that the characters have a shared history. That makes it easier to imagine them speaking and having events with each other when you're not around, or that this place continues to exist after you leave it behind, which is a quality that the best parts of Witcher 1 and 2 also had, and one that is sadly missing for most of the rest of Witcher 3. So that's all the structure changes and Geralt's character and thoughtful inclusions in dialogue and immersive details. But what about gameplay, sword and sign sorcery? And then beyond the combat, how does the change to open world affect being a Witcher? What about the UI changes or the surprising fact that Geralt can now both dive to swim underwater and jump and climb without context points dictating that you can do so? I'm hesitant to speak about this for two reasons. The first is that I prefer to have the combat analysis as its own topic later in these videos, so you get the chance to either see some of it in the footage first or be reminded of how it feels if you've played the game yourself. And those sections tend to be pretty long, and that's not a good way to start these videos. The second reason is that the gameplay is at the core of the secret negative quality in White Orchard. It's a secret in that you can't know it exists until you get to the rest of the game and play it for a few dozen hours. It's inherently undetectable until then. Regardless, it's still a good idea to go over the general changes to combat and how you interact with the world. Inputs are easy and not much has changed there. Left mouse button is a quick attack, hold shift plus left mouse click for a slower heavy attack. Spacebar is a dodge roll, but now there's also a quick step dodge if you press left alt, which is what you'll be using a lot more often. Right click is block and parry, hold to block, and time raising your sword to the enemy's attack to get a somewhat Sekiro style deflection. It automatically deals a riposte. The 5 usual Witcher signs Yrden, Quen, Igni, Axii, and Ard are here bound to the Q key, and you can flip between them and any other combat option like a bomb and very soon a crossbow in a quick select menu not unlike the one from Witcher 2. This time by pressing tab. The steel and silver sword system is still present, as always, steel for humans and silver for monsters. Equipment upgrades are more plentiful and more action RPG-like than ever before, and you do not retain any of your gear from the previous game if you import a save, which means we're brushing against continuity this soon, and we're not ready for that. Sorry, I know I should cut parts like this out of my voiceover, but there's just so much to speak about and so many long-running threads that all need attention from the past games and books and how this game works, and holy shit, we'll get to it all. Let's just keep moving on. Some enemies are weak to certain signs, but it's uncommon and treated like a key opening a lock rather than realizing a weakness dynamically and exploiting it. For examples, using Yrden on the big wraiths to make them capable of taking significant damage, and using Axii on Alguls to remove their buffed thorny frenzy state, so you can safely hit them. The Vigor system from Witcher 2 is gone, and instead you can freely use your lone, singular sign charge however you like without any fear of lowering your physical damage output, which is a welcome change, but also quite limiting when it comes to waiting for that one charge to refill for mixing in signs. All of this is orchestrated half automatically by an unavoidable soft lock-on system, similar to Z targeting again, but this time it's mandatory, although there's also a harder lock-on that you can do by pressing the Z key, although you never have to do that if you don't want to. Maybe on console it's better, I don't know. Spacebar is also jump, but you cannot jump in combat, because there are 2 control modes in this game that flip between each other, the exploration set and the combat one. Though it's important to note you can force Geralt back into the exploration version even if enemies are around by holding down shift, so you sprint from one control set to the other, although I don't think you can jump while doing this, because now spacebar is that longer dodge roll. I've seen people compare this combat to Arkham Asylum, and I really can't agree with that. Maybe the later entries in that series are closer, I haven't played them. Some Assassin's Creed games are a little more like Witcher 3, but they share more gameplay features outside of combat than within it. It's probably fair to say that Witcher 3 is its own mutated beast for better or worse, but where the game does borrow from Arkham is in the heightened Witcher Sense detective mode, complete with smell-o-vision. And if you played this game, I hope you thought to check the options menu to turn off the awful fisheye feature of this mode, because you use this all the time, and I think this looks pretty bad. Gone is tapping the medallion to analyze your surroundings from Witcher 2. Now it's a quick toggle that you snap to and from whenever you're not in combat. Default right click and away you go with everything that's important being highlighted, and you just follow the trail. In White Orchard this is quite cool since Geralt will stop and comment on what he finds. This whole system is a translation of the decades of experience he has as being one of the best trackers in the world, which is something I don't think the books or games have ever stated before this moment, but I have to admit it does make sense. Geralt has about 100 years of monster hunting experience after all. And yet, he's only level 1. Listen, I know this doesn't really matter because it's a progression system designed to let the player feel like they're building something and doesn't represent the character, but would it really have been so bad to start the game with Geralt at level 50 or something and everything else scaled accordingly, and also to not have a system of infinitely spawning guards that are always much higher level than you, the world famous Witcher who should be able to wipe out an entire squad of any soldiers and has done in the past, and shatter the immersion that is so carefully constructed otherwise in the game? And speaking of shattered immersion, this is something that has now changed in the next gen update of Witcher 3, which hopefully I'll find a way to squeeze in a section about later. That progression system is an important part of the game though. You get an incremental amount of experience from killing level appropriate monsters, way more experience from level appropriate quests, and practically nothing if they're not level appropriate. In the case of monsters, it is actually nothing. No XP. There's an overly convoluted system of acquiring points to buy perks, but also unlocking the slots separately needed to equip them so you can have more perks than you have slots for, and also mutagens that give bonuses depending on how the colors are arranged too, like some mutated Christmas tree instead of a talent tree. And you can also get more perk points from places of power as an exploration reward. Gear functions similarly as stat boosts and doesn't provide much in the way of a tangible change in how the game plays. With all this work, these stats must matter a lot, right? Despite the game finally feeling more like an action combat system, the stats and perks are given about equal importance in this progression system. Roach will help you get to this gear and these treasures. If you're hearing, place of power, gotta be, for the 20th time, it's likely that your eternal and immortal horse companion has gotten you there. I laughed so hard when I discovered Geralt named the animal he rides around on after his buddy from Witcher 2. And learning that that isn't the case is a disappointment I have never gotten over. Roach is not Roach. Roach is Roach. And Roach might be Roach.
This here's Roach.
This is from the books. This is always what Geralt calls his horse, and it isn't clear to me if the character being called Roach is a joke playing on that or a funny lost in translation coincidence. Or should it be found in translation? Your horse is almost always a quick whistle away, default key X, and you can even do it in combat. Roach can never die, but she, or he, if she's replaced through a quest decision later, can get spooked by enemies and is therefore not a source of invulnerability. You can also get hurt while on horseback and can try to fight back, but it's quite clunky, so I don't recommend it. Maybe with practice it can be fun, but I wasn't compelled to try. Roach will teleport next to you if you're far enough away from where you last left her, although the game does try its best to hide that from you by doing it out of visible range. You can see her icon pop up on the minimap when called. And yes, I know I just said a magic word when it comes to the Witcher 3 fandom, but don't get excited. This is a Joseph Anderson video. We'll get to minimaps later.
That's horseshit. I mean, I got so much more I want to tell you, and...
The miniature map that is White Orchard is something we can finish talking about right now though. Roach should be essential for you getting around even though the play area is on the small side. There are fast travel points you can use to go even faster, but you can only use these if you are currently next to one. You can't just choose to do this whenever, although there is also the option to ride out of bounds to trigger a fast travel selection if you like. This can sometimes be faster than riding all the way back, and I like the compromise of this fast travel system so you just can't warp around whenever you want. After all this galloping around from place to place, trying out combat, setting the area right by cleansing it of monsters, finding the pan, hopefully clearing the well for the sick child, searching the Griffin's nest, and securing a lure to attract the monster, you'll be ready for the final test of this tutorial zone. This is one of the best fights in the base game and one of the best presented. There's a longer build up to this Griffin than most big monster contracts, and there's even a proper phase change to a second location in this big sprawling area that seems to have been designed specifically for this open air spectacle of a struggle. You also get a new gameplay option right before this, the crossbow. Until now, you've been left to wander around and fight mostly small enemies with the occasional bigger one, so groups of drowners, ghouls, neckers, wolves, and humans, and 3 sort of mini-boss encounters for more difficult one-on-one fights with the high-level wraith guarding the cemetery, the noon wraith we mentioned earlier, and a few bears sprinkled throughout the woods. I love these bears, by far my favorite bears in any game. They're huge and vicious and look scarier than most monsters. This is a game that's about hunting supernatural beasts that require a special silver sword to damage, but you know what can really wreck your shit? A bear. The Witcher 3, best bears in gaming. Doing these fights gives you many opportunities to test out the different modes of combat. Against groups, it's all about playing evasively and striking when you have a chance against enemies that only take a couple of hits to take down. So you are rewarded for playing patiently and methodically by gradually tipping the scales in your favor with each successful exploited opportunity, and rewards you for viewing this as a group fight where you fight them all together instead of just one-on-one. Once you adjust to the somewhat stiff controls, it's surprisingly fun to do this here in White Orchard when you first play, even on Death March, which was the first setting I went on for my first 2 playthroughs. And I'm man enough to admit that I died here quite a bit as I adjusted to the distinctly different combat after Witcher 2. You have to be much more mindful of all the pieces moving around you and where your next position and strike is going to be, and probably fumble through signs since you don't know yet that one of them is 20 million times more powerful than all of the others put together. Contrast this with Witcher 2, which was all about cheesing your way to victory by any and all means possible, and I think it's easy to see how much of an improvement this already is. Bigger one-on-one battles are also engaging at this stage of the game, in no small part because of the impressive visuals of the enemies you're fighting, although if you're big into another monster hunting franchise, that may not work on you as well as it will on others. Regardless, you still have some telegraphs to learn and a different pace of combat to feel out, with an enemy that takes many more hits to kill than the big group fights. It's a back and forth of attacks and counterattacks rather than evasive tactics and chipping in hits. And then along comes the Griffin as the biggest monster yet with the largest health pool in all of White Orchard, and not only do you get to fight with Vesemir by your side, you also get a brand new shiny toy as an expanded combat option, which you get to use right away because the enemy is weak to crossbow bolts when flying. And this boded really well. So far there's been both variety and progression to the combat encounters in the game. The tutorial teased this fight right at the start and then it delivered on those expectations by the end. I wouldn't call the Griffin fight an excellent boss or anything for its gameplay in a vacuum, but for an RPG series that's finally properly dipping its toes into action combat, and this is the tutorial boss fight, it was a really promising sign. Heh, get it? Sign? Witcher? You have a chance to finish anything you might have missed after this, and if you don't, some quests will hit a different ending and you will not be able to complete them. You can come back later and see some of those consequences if you like. The game does this again later at a similar cutoff point, but provides a warning that time. If it does the same for this stage in White Orchard, then I never saw it. There are 3 final things to cover here. The first 2 are quick mentions of the conversations you have to have with this fellow here named Gontar O'Dim and another guy a few tables over who will introduce you to the in-universe game that uses cards, Gwent specifically, but we're not ready to discuss Hearts of Stone or Hearthstone yet, so just keep them in mind. The last thing is the conclusion of the conversation we witnessed earlier between 2 farmers of currently greatly differing positions of power. The local man has come back with the promised grain and it is apparently rotten. The Nilfgaardian commander takes this as a sign of disrespect after he just went out of his way to be more than reasonable with the locals, and has the farmer sentenced to 15 lashings as punishment, which you actually hear getting carried out if you stick around after this. You can count all 15. Again, the game is full of details like this. Another impressive one, way across on the other side of the orchard, is a man who explains in dialogue that he didn't fight in the war because he's missing fingers. And if you look carefully as you walk along with him during his quest, you can see that his model is actually missing those fingers, which I carefully inspected because I wanted to criticize it if they weren't, and the game won. Geralt has quite the righteous reaction to seeing this man be punished, and it's one of the few times that you might find yourself uncomfortably disagreeing with the character you're piloting. I don't think the man deserved to be lashed for this, don't get me wrong, because I believe this was a mistake and not an act of rebellion, but I also understand the commander's frustration and see the difficult position that he's been put into. The much stronger disagreement I have with Geralt is what he says next when challenged over what he would do in the same position. "Would never be in your stead," says the man who was just strung along, lost for over a year and thrust into the position of serving under kings, constantly doing things he didn't want to do, and forced to make the most of bad situations. And it's not like he's never coerced into doing things later in this game either. He says all of this to a man who almost certainly didn't choose to be here. At best, this is Geralt trying to realign himself to the person he was before and wants to be again. At worst, this is the first sign of the severed continuity of the games. And for now, that is White Orchard, one of the strongest openings of any RPG I've played, and also of any open world game I have played. It wonderfully introduces so much while operating on different levels at the same time for different audiences. And when I've tried to put myself into the position of those different people, I don't see much to complain about. and I was able to experience this fresh again when playing it a second time after reading the books. It was quite the unique experience, actually. It was like having learned another language, and now I could pick up on the secret lore hiding in plain sight. Should have learned Polish after all and reread the books, huh? I've had enough time to do it. The final scene starts as a demonstration of how hated witchers are, fittingly with a huge escalation of harassment only after the big bad monster has been slain. How curious that those things align so often. But this is also acting as misdirection, so you can be caught off guard by an amazing moment of subverted expectations. One of my favorite scenes in all 3 games, when the apparent damsel in distress Yennefer finds you.
Excuses, excuses. You've not changed a bit.
Subverted expectations has become something of a heated term in recent years. In fact, in some circles, it might be more acceptable to say you have perverted expectations. I think the root cause is a series of disappointments in big media like Star Wars and Game of Thrones and the DC Comics movies, and the justification for some poor story planning there has been, no, you don't get it, it's just subverting your expectations, but I'm not really into anime, so I can't say for sure. I do want to take the opportunity to help eliminate some of the poor media literacy issues I've seen popping up because of this. When someone says, I hate when something subverts my expectations, what they're actually saying is, I hate it when my expectations are subverted poorly. Just like when I say it's something that I like, what I'm actually saying is, I like it when it's done well. I think something is being implied here, but I can't say what. I know this sounds redundant, but this kind of breakdown of communication is becoming more and more common, sadly. People set rules for themselves and sometimes try to press them onto others about what kind of standards are acceptable in art. One that I used to abide myself was that endings where it's revealed, and it was all a dream, could never be acceptable. And yet there's a video game I critiqued on this channel that does pretty much exactly that, and it's something I've grown to love about that game as more time passes. Rules about art and a consensus being reached about qualitative standards are still good, but they should be treated more like guidelines. They are still undeniably important, of course, and worthy of being used and being a dominant force in many discussions, just lately I've seen it being taken too far to the level of, my opinion is the correct one because it abides by X standard. If you've noticed a sharp increase in semantic arguments recently, then you've been a witness to this too. It should go without saying that if something is done well, then it is done well. If it is good, then it is good. But people in conversations don't tend to carefully construct every sentence they say and instead speak broadly and are then challenged specifically, which is like bringing chess pieces onto a checkers board in the middle of a match. You can still make broad statements like this that carry more meaning to them though. I do tend to like subverted expectations in general and have a higher tolerance for it being done in a middling way because I've consumed so much media and analyzed so many stories. If I can be genuinely surprised by something, caught off guard like I was by my favorite movies I watched as a teenager, then that's a big positive to me because it's become more uncommon as the years have gone by. Remember, I turned 38 recently, so on the landscape of YouTube, I am goddamn ancient. And when I'm even older, maybe I won't feel the same way anymore, because tastes and standards change. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the realm of art is a space of infinite possibilities. So saying something like, I hate subverted expectations in every case, is just setting yourself up for a meta experience of subverted expectations when you finally encounter a use of it that you enjoy. You may dislike it in most cases, but I guarantee that we could find an exception, which is why you should always make these little translations in your head when you hear someone speak in extremes. Myself included, there's subtext even in everyday language, and we're all cowards. There are 3 examples of it right here in this next section, and if you've read the books before getting to the scene, you could argue there's even more. For the experience I had my first time playing after Witcher 1 and 2, I had the expectation of rescuing Yennefer from Nilfgaard, which was then wonderfully shattered when she showed up at the end of White Orchard. Although I do think CD Projekt cheated a bit here by making her appear in a lot of trouble in the opening cinematic, which begs the question now what she was even doing there. You can imagine she was in the area, got into a minor spat of trouble when she told someone to igni their own ass, and then had to scamper away and got caught in a bad spot during the invasion, but that's a fair bit of imaginative labor you have to do there when the effortless impression you get on first viewing is that Yennefer is on the run and Geralt was going to find her and reconcile in some quiet spot somewhere. which is where your expectations are twisted again. You would think this would be an emotional reunion with a long-lost couple falling into each other's arms. No matter your audience level, game knowledge or book knowledge, or none of either, it's actually a fair assumption. You can't get to this point without seeing the dream scene after all, but no, Yennefer is all business with only a few awkward hints that she missed Geralt, and the two are quite clinical with each other. This was so unusual that I immediately corrected my perception of their relationship to being a lot more complicated than I initially thought, which again struck me as very interesting. This continued when I read the books too. Geralt and Yennefer's bad romance is one of the more unusual ones I've encountered in fiction and still stands out as a highlight today. But then we come to subverted expectation number 3, which, like Mambo number 5, is very bad. The Emperor of Nilfgaard wants to find his daughter Cirilla, Ciri for short, and has enlisted Yennefer to aid in that search. Remember that Yennefer was captured by Nilfgaard about 2 years ago, after she was rescued by Geralt and Letho from the Wild Hunt, with Geralt trading himself for her place. She was locked in prison for a while, and that's the last you heard about her from Letho in Witcher 2. Surely Yennefer has been having a rough time of it and only recently released from captivity, and she's secretly working against them while also using their resources to find Ciri. They have a common goal, so why not pretend to be a helpful ally and plot your moment of revenge at the same time? That's why she was unable to find Geralt, why she's being standoffish with him right now, and when they're finally alone, she's going to explain all that to him and bring him in on the plan. Let's hear that from Yennefer now.
One thing before we go. Why didn't you contact me? Didn't need me? Didn't even want to see me?
I didn't want to spoil things. I'd heard you and Triss made a great couple.
Yen, I'd lost my memory.
Really? That's your excuse? Let's drop it, all right? It's not what you think, or it helped me understand how much I love you. I don't wish to hear it. Any of it.
Okay, so in the previous videos, I pointed out their respective lowest moments and how they rank as the worst sections in the whole series. Witcher 1's prologue, Witcher 2's battle for Vergen on Yorveth's side, and in this video, it'll be the ending of the base game. But if we're talking about the most condensed, purest moment of awfulness, down to how low things can fall for just a few seconds, then this is the Mariana Trench for the Witcher video games. I can't even begin to recreate the torrent of confused helicopter noises that I made when I first got here. I've lost sleep over what Yennefer says here. I'm not kidding, I've lay awake at night trying so hard to find a way to make this make sense, and on my first playthrough I even deluded myself into thinking she was just saying this because she thought the room was magically bugged by Nilfgaard forces and that she would give the real reason when they met up again privately in Skellige. That's how much copium I was huffing, and I didn't even get there for another 80 hours of playtime. If you're a fan of SNL skits, this is my papyrus. She does not give another reason. She never justifies what she says here. In fact, later she doubles down on it. This is character assassination of the highest order in a way that is still stunning to me years later. Today, at least I think so, I understand why CD Projekt did this. I don't agree with it, but there is a reason. Maybe. It even manages to operate on another level by giving you a good motive to pursue Triss, even though Yennefer is clearly the canonical romance option of this game. Yennefer's clearest personality trait is being a bitch, and I say that affectionately because she's that bitch. Successful, powerful, beautiful, and you could continue on with the fulls for a while because, more than anything, she's full of herself. I like this kind of character in media and IRL, and they are surprisingly rare in video games when it comes to fully realized romance options, or at least they are in the way that Witcher 3 portrays it because, truthfully, there's no melting Yennefer's ice, and she wouldn't be Yennefer anymore if you could. More plainly put, it is very difficult to make a character who is an awful person and still have them be sympathetic and likable. Yennefer pulls that off while still being herself. But there's being a bitch and then there's being willfully abusive. And while there are a few moments in the books where Yennefer doesn't treat Geralt very well, and also moments when he doesn't treat her very well either, I don't think she is ever intentionally and consciously choosing to be as cruel as she is in this game, which happens in this scene and twice more later on if you make choices that displease her. This crosses the line from her complex book character in a mutually toxic relationship to someone else. This is her personality traits of cold and stubborn and arrogant being used as an excuse to make her do things that the story requires her to do that she wouldn't do otherwise. Look, if you've only played this game or are watching this blind, you may not understand why this is such a big issue. Geralt cheated on Yennefer when he was coupled with Triss, right? And Yen finds it unbelievable that he could have had amnesia, so she doesn't buy it as an explanation. Well, Yennefer had the same amnesia. Yeah, both of them were captured by the Wild Hunt, and when you leave the Wild Hunt, whatever magic they use on you while you're one of their thralls temporarily wipes your mind and, it seems, permanently erases your memory of your time spent with them, which likely means that the temporary general amnesia is just a side effect of the permanent specific brain cleanse. So not only does Yennefer know that Geralt really did have amnesia, she also just went through this herself. She recovered faster than he did because Nilfgaard's mages helped her. So there's an inkling of a possibility that she thinks Triss would have cured Geralt and therefore he's lying, but Yennefer also knows all about Triss's history with Geralt and how infatuated she is with him in the books. Maybe she's read them. We'll get to all this in the book discussion. For now, just take my word for it that Yennefer not trying to find Geralt after regaining her memory, even if it was just for the sake of Ciri, is a gigantic violation of the character development she went through in the last book. And her saying this in this scene to Geralt is so terrible that it wouldn't surprise me if some book readers stopped playing the game after this and never came back, or at least had to take an extended break after a beloved character was flanderized to the point that they're unrecognizable. That's not the only reason book readers might be upset with this section in Vizima Castle, but instead I want to give you all whiplash by flipping over to gushing praise over the game for providing me with one of the most amazing moments I've ever had with the medium. So you leave White Orchard with Yennefer, are attacked by the Wild Hunt in a cinematic, and they barely escape. Bridges are a big weakness for the Wild Hunt, and you see that here and will again later. God, I hope at least one of you just lost your shit at that joke. Two cool small details I like about this are that you can see Vizima in the distance from White Orchard as you're exploring, and that Geralt explains to Yennefer that he had a dream about her recently, and just as he's about to explain that the Wild Hunt showed up in it, the Wild Hunt shows up in reality to chase them with the same snow in the air, as if he summoned them by thinking about them. I like these types of little links back. So, Vizima Castle. Similar to the opening of a book story, Geralt has a shower and a shave and a shampoo, then he's off to meet the Emperor of Nilfgaard. This is not their first meeting. It's not even their second meeting. But on the way there, you have to walk through the halls of the castle, and this right here is where the magic happened for me. I've already been here in Witcher 1. And this recreation of it in Witcher 3 is sublimely faithful. They could have easily justified remaking the whole thing with their new engine and visual standards, a complete structural overhaul, but instead chose not to for the sake of players like me that went through the series in order or have been here from the beginning. There are renovations happening now, with the Temerian lilies being removed to make room for Nilfgaard's emblems. And then you walk to the meeting and it's in the same room that you had your private conversation with Foltest, where you may have played dice with him near the end of Witcher 1. There's a history here, a kingdom that stood proud and has fallen, the king that was once ruling that you saw die, that you feel as a player and aligns you wordlessly with what Geralt must be feeling too, and is also feeling as he confronts his past now altered in the present, with Yennefer and Ciri being brought back in the surprise third act his life has been granted after his death in Rivia. I felt this invasion, I felt this change. This wasn't just some background dressing or I guess there's a war on now or something, like it is in something like Dragon Age Origins. This did, on some level, make me feel what many of the people in Temeria are right now as they adjust to Nilfgaardian rulership. This is the strongest effect environmental storytelling has ever had on me, probably because it's benefiting from being set up 2 games ago and has therefore been charging up the punch it delivers here. It also recontextualizes all of Witcher 1 and once again rewards you for paying attention and caring about the characters in this place and letting yourself be immersed. It's kind of like going back to the street and the neighborhood that you grew up in when you were a kid, and things are different now. Stores have changed and people have moved. I couldn't stop myself from wondering how the people I had met in that game were dealing with this in Vizima right now. And this isn't just something that I had to think of myself. Witcher 3 has a surprising amount of callbacks and cameos and tidbits about this is what they're doing now with characters from the past games. The growing trend I'm starting to notice as I'm writing the script from my notes is that Witcher 3 is a game that cares greatly about the small details, to an impressive level to be sure, but sometimes at the sacrifice of giving appropriate attention to the grand details. The only other game that has done something close to this moment for me was World of Warcraft, when it released its expansion Cataclysm and had the big bad boss Deathwing alter the world from what it had been at the game's launch. On the day of that patch, the effect of Deathwing causing the titular Cataclysm happened between your last logout of Wrath of the Lich King and your first log-in of Cataclysm's Prelude. He could also show up in some zones sometimes and bathe the whole place in fire and kill you as an added fun detail. This was a permanent change that I believe is still present in the game today. although there may have been another update by now that shows the NPCs recovering from that damage. As far as I know though, most of the environmental changes, like the 1,000 needles going from a desert canyon to flooded with water, are still there. This wasn't something I enjoyed as much as what happens here in Witcher 3 because it didn't feel as real. It's also possible that I'm just not remembering it as fondly as I should be because Cataclysm was the first WoW expansion that stunk. And this isn't me trying to be all too cool for school either, since WoW and Blizzard are in a horrible place now and their reputation likely won't ever recover. Mists of Pandaria is the most fun I ever had playing WoW, even above the original vanilla launch, because of the high quality of its dungeon and raid content. And that came out after Cataclysm. It would have been great to see Vizima and the Outskirts in this game too as a further exploration of this change, but if it was between doing that and going to new places, then I am happy they chose to go somewhere else rather than only retread Witcher 1's grounds, even if I am sad at the lost opportunity here. Like I said in the Witcher 1 video, there is a line in this game explaining what happened to the Outskirts during Nilfgaard's invasion. It's marched on and razed presumably to nothing. Sometimes I wonder if the original idea was to have you start there instead of White Orchard. They are quite similar in scale and location and feeling after all. It would have been an amazing callback for returning players while being functionally identical to White Orchard for new people, but maybe that couldn't fit properly with Yennefer finding you and having the distance to be chased by the Wild Hunts. And also they would have had to deal with the continuity of what you did in Witcher 1 if you're importing a save. Speaking of, that's the good chunk of continuity in this part. There are two more that aren't. How Witcher 3 begins to address your choices from the previous games, and also the retraction of the Pledge of Allegiance it made to the books in the opening. Yeah, this part is kind of a doozy. Funnily enough, both of these require a specific audience to even be noticed. If you haven't read the books, you can't be upset about what Witcher 3 does to the Emperor and Ciri here because this is your introduction and baseline. Conversely, you have to have not played the games to even see the choices be acknowledged. Let's rewind real quick and put the beard back on Geralt. This guy with a name that screams, "I'm evil" shows up in the scene even though he turns out to not be all that evil. At least he isn't called Deathmold. If you've imported a save, it is quite the brief conversation, practically a waste of a scene really. If you haven't, then this is where the choices from Witcher 2 are recapped and you have to simulate what Geralt could have done, which is an option you take when starting a new game. One that was very confusing to me. Does simulating a save mean that choices are going to be made for me, or does not simulating a save mean that I'm going to be asked questions instead of it being simulated for me? Is it pet smart or pet smart? Turns out saying yes is what makes this conversation happen, and this right now is the simulation. So, did you kill Aryan Lavalette? Did you leave with Roach or Yorveth to get to Vergen? Did you save Triss and Lochween, or did you help your chosen buddy with Philippa or Anais? Did you let Sheila de Tanzerville die in the Megascope sabotage? And after that, did you kill Letho or let him live?
That an ongoing alliance? What's Letho up to?
That's it. That's all the game cares to ask about, with some flavorful comments on your choices, which I appreciated. I believe this is one of only 2 times Saskia's name is spoken in this game, although she's also a Gwent card. I like these comments so much, I wish this conversation happened even if you imported a save with the answers chosen automatically so you could have this recognition of past decisions. It's also very easy to import the wrong save from Witcher 2 because of the weird order they're presented in, meaning that it's a common issue to have Letho dead even if you spared him because that's what the game defaults to if you import one save too early, to save money. This happened to me on one playthrough and I had to Google to find out what went wrong. This isn't just an enjoyable conversation that adds a bit to how Geralt's deeds are viewed as famous in this world, and that Nilfgaard has an interest in his career and many spies, but it's also a way to assure the player that their choices have been loaded correctly. But yeah, that's it. Just those 5. There are definitely more things that can be imported than this that the game just doesn't ask you about. Here's a shot of Geralt's tattoo from Flotsam to quickly prove that, but these are what they consider to be the most important ones. If you've been watching these videos in order, or maybe only played this game once yourself and that's it, this should be filling you with a sense of unease right now, or amusement if you like to see me go off.
Cracked monocle. Interesting.
Continuity from the books is arguably on even shakier ground, but a lot of players won't be able to tell, and then, when they do find out, they may not even care. The joke I made earlier about book readers typing out a negative review because of liberties taken with the source material can become deathly serious here, because if they started listing all the issues out, they'd collapse from exhaustion before getting to the end. Sapkowski, your readers collapsed, but there's a part of me, even after having read the books myself, that can't be angry about the changes made. This is an adaptation, and there are almost always huge changes when a story moves from one medium to another. Faithfulness is not the only metric an adaptation can be measured by, not by a long shot. A positive example of change being that in the books, Geralt only ever uses a silver weapon once or twice. In fact, I find it hard to remember it happening even when it comes to monster fights, and for the overwhelming majority of the books, Geralt's silver sword is lost, and he doesn't get it back. Steel weapons work just fine for hurting monsters in the books, and of course, why wouldn't they? The damage caused by a forceful enough physical impact is always going to do something, never mind a sharp edge being capable of tearing flesh whether it's human or monster, but if you let that happen in the games, then that undermines the dual sword system, and a part of the Witcher mythos, because players will just focus on one sword type for the sake of convenience. Silver swords should also be capable of damaging non-monster targets too, but that's also a limitation put in place to require the use of engaging with a system that's being enforced by the developers as an interesting gameplay choice. There's an interview at the end of the Witcher comic anthology book, yes I read that too, that explains something similar that happened going from writing for the games to the comics. They made Geralt shout the names of signs he was casting because otherwise it wasn't always clear what he was doing. They thought about using symbols to signify it, but they decided it would be too confusing and may require reference material to be understood, and I definitely agree with this call. The most interesting part about this was that Geralt shouting the sign names wasn't necessary in the games because the player is the one deciding to use them, so they always know which one it is, and this also isn't an anime game. The player control being provided nullifies the need for clarity on a sign cast, and in the books it can be clearly and easily written out without dialogue. This all makes sense and is simple when laid out like this, but the crucial takeaway here is that the medium is actually dictating character traits and changes in personality and actions. Geralt, the comic book character, is different than Geralt, the video game character, who is also different than Geralt, the original book character. And not because someone decided that just for fun, but because the demands of the different mediums necessitated it. Another would be how talkative Geralt is in the games when he's alone, which may even be an abstraction of his internal monologue that is being pretended to be spoken aloud, so it's not all wrapped in his head. Although sometimes characters will acknowledge him doing it. Whereas with the written word, and in comics too, it's very easy to just have thoughts and internal deliberation laid out silently. Sometimes descriptions can be influenced by the current mood of the prospective character you're currently linked with, and are baked into the paragraphs between dialogue. You can't do that with a visual medium, or at least not easily.
I'm being observed. Don't know by whom or why. Unsettling signs.
On the other hand, visual mediums have the advantage of not needing to rely on text to set the scene, which can take paragraphs and paragraphs or entire boring pages if you're Tolkien Martin Jordan. But this also comes with the drawback that you now need a budget high enough to supply those visuals, which can turn into a steep limitation on what kind of scope and setting your story can have. This can change stories and make scenes be deleted because they just couldn't afford to make them. Whereas every word I'm typing right now costs about the same amount of damage to my finger joints, and that's about it. I can say things like Optimus Prime breakdancing on Mars, Ryan Reynolds as Wolverine fighting Hugh Jackman as Deadpool, and Geralt wrapping a lewd Christmas present for Yennefer. And you have those images in your head essentially for free, and you're welcome. But if I were to commission art to go along with these examples, then that could range from a few $100s to a few thousand. This is my short-winded way of saying that things are naturally going to be different when jumping from the books to the games, and that's before we get into the reality of CD Projekt having a big franchise on their hands here, and that means undoing the mostly final ending that the books gave these characters, which is more awkward than just Geralt's maybe death at the end because the books also include many moments of flash forward, like the end credits of an 80s movie. This is what happened to this character, this place, and this world, that the games just quietly reverse at best like with Dijkstra, and outright contradict at worst like here with the Emperor. There's also the positive comparison to something like the Game of Thrones adaptation, that the Witcher books were finished, so a continuation carries with it less expectations, but they're still there, and more flexibility instead of needing to nail an ending to something that's been anticipated for years and still hasn't arrived in its original book form. Although by the time this video is out, maybe it has. So instead of complaining about the conflict of compromise that comes with adaptation, my goal is to point instances of it out and only condemn when I think it was done needlessly or poorly. But you have to understand I'm also very sympathetic about the corner that CD Projekt put themselves in, which is something I spoke about in the previous video. No one could have known, least of all them, how successful this series would become and whether they would ever get the opportunity to make any game with Yennefer and Ciri in it, never mind one as ambitious as this one. So when this finally happened, which if the games kept going it had to eventually unless Geralt was to stay an amnesiac forever with every other character never mentioning his life, and at that point why even make it about Geralt at all, it had the weight of decisions made from the previous games stacked on top of book continuity as well. The Witcher 3 should be the beginning of its own canon, which is another reason why it is a weird sequel. I want to state that now and expand upon it later. I will criticize the shortcomings of the choices CD Projekt made in their adaptation freely for the rest of the video, but I want that conclusion to be clear right now, this early, because if you haven't read the books, you have no idea just how bad this gets as the game goes on, and if you have, then hopefully you are nodding along with me right now as I am recording the script, nodding into the microphone like an idiot. And yes, I realize how utterly bizarre this is when Witcher 2 was so astoundingly faithful and so thoughtfully continued the story from the books, but here we are.
We've no time to read books.
This is why Yennefer didn't find Geralt, by the way. It's wrapped up in this issue. The story needs her to both have had a reason to stay away from Geralt until now, and to also remain away from him, apparently simmering in anger for a while longer. Because otherwise, why aren't they just staying together and working as a team and also having desperate sex on the floor right now, since they're a madly passionate couple that haven't had a chance to do that in 2 years? It makes no sense, but then how do you have that and also let Geralt wander the open world they created, being on the path and being a Witcher? Is Yennefer going to be out of frame casting spells for every fight? Is she going to be a silent auto-follow companion that only pipes up when riding between places or when a quest has a line of dialogue for her to slip in after Geralt speaks, with the camera abruptly cutting over to her as she speaks because her line has been awkwardly transplanted into the scene if she happens to be present for it? What about resolving things with Triss and allowing players to choose her if they're attached to the CD Projekt Redhead after playing the first 2 games before this? Does Yennefer say,
"Seems like your party is full, Geralt. I'm heading back to the tavern. Let me know if you need me, dear friend."
because all this would be just as bad as her saying,
Really? That's your excuse?
when it comes to breaking character. But that still doesn't excuse that she does this. Here's a quick solution. Yennefer and Geralt are permanently linked through the power of a djinn from a book story. This is something Witcher 3 even uses in a quest later to great effect. So, abracadabra, Geralt's amnesia and Yennefer's amnesia were linked through this same spell. Plus, he joined the Wild Hunt at the same time that she left it. She was captured by Nilfgaard and kept in prison, and it was only 6 months ago when Geralt regained his memories that the fog also cleared on Yennefer. Or hell, if that's too much of a stretch, just say that it took her longer to recover because she's not a Witcher, or because she was kept in captivity, or because she was with the Wild Hunt for longer. The information she supplied to Nilfgaard in Witcher 2 about the Lodge is completely unnecessary to the story anyway, and could be hand-waved as a lie Nilfgaard used. So the previous 6 months have been about Yennefer gaining some control and favor with Nilfgaard now that her memories are back. The Emperor already knew who she was after all, and as we'll soon see, has a vested interest in working with her to find Ciri. And then when Yennefer and Geralt are reunited, things are a bit awkward, but Yennefer is understanding about what Geralt did with Triss because she's been living with the same issues until just as recently. Throw a line in there about how she also had a relationship with someone while being an amnesiac. Letho already says something like this in Witcher 2 about her actions. And now you have the perfect justification for why these two want to rekindle their relationship but are feeling hurt and need time to do so. This is a horrible thing that has been done to them. And they are reset to the flirting stage that they can speedrun through. It also better sets up Yennefer's side quest in Skellige. Is this a perfect solution? No. In fact, it probably has some unforeseen problems that would need to be worked on, but like with every suggestion I ever make in these videos, it's not meant to be an actual usable alternative. It's just meant to be proof that a problem could have been avoided with some more thought instead of throwing Yennefer under the bus and potentially ruining her character to a new audience. However, maybe I'm wasting my time here because according to a Twitter poll I ran, most people still picked Yennefer over Triss, but I do have to wonder how many are being honest about their blind first playthrough. On the other hand, the problems with the Emperor and Ciri aren't possible to solve. The story just needs to be rewritten entirely for it to be compatible with the books. Not to mention Nilfgaard's third invasion attempt at the Northern Realms also being highly unlikely, although not explicitly impossible from what I remember the final book saying, but I could be wrong. Ciri being missing and Geralt needing to find her is fine. The Emperor being involved is not. Emir var Emrys, the white flame dancing on the graves of his foes, is indeed Ciri's biological father, which is a secret that could topple his entire regime, and yet he not only has very public plans for Ciri, he also has a huge portrait of her hanging in his room that he cared so much for that it's being transported with him during his war efforts to be put up in presumably every new office he claims. The Emperor's wife right now should be imposter Ciri, which is something that sounds ridiculous, I know, but he does marry a fake version of his own daughter in the books, who he knows is a fake and goes along with it to own the libs, even as the public does not know she's a fake, or that if she were the real Cirilla, that the Emperor would be married to his own daughter. This isn't even the only imposter Ciri either. The books are usually really good, I promise. As far as I can tell, imposter Empress Ciri does not exist in the games, and never has. This isn't the only sweeping change like this which has a ripple effect back to the books. If she never existed, does that mean there's a different version of the book events in this canon? The answer seems to be yes, and not just about this, because there are more drastic, worse differences coming that raise lots of similar questions. Hopefully you're starting to understand what I meant when I said book knowledge can ruin the game's story, but remember, it's also required to understand it. It's such a weird situation. It's so interesting to think about that I hesitate to call it bad. Anyway, this is the goal of the game. The Emperor of Nilfgaard is the main quest giver, but it's something that Geralt already wanted to do anyway. He just didn't think it was possible because Ciri's magical powers make it so she could be anywhere and anywhen, just like Alvin in Witcher 1. Almost exactly like Alvin in Witcher 1. Nilfgaard's spies and Yennefer have 3 leads, and you finalize these plans with her in this final private conversation. She needs Geralt's mundane, traditional tracking skills because she can no longer use magic to try to locate Ciri, she explains, because the Wild Hunt can detect her attempts and then show up to try abducting her again, and she does not ask if Geralt has gone through something similar or has seen them recently, nor does he let her know about the visits he received from them in Witcher 1.
I dislike it here.
Then she immediately offers to teleport Geralt to Velen, and then uses a teleport spell herself to leave the city to go to a place to steal one of the most powerful magical artifacts in Skellige to use to find Ciri. Magically. There's another important conversation here with one of Nilfgaard's ambassadors. This is a summary of the current situation in the world and a preview of the places you will be visiting in your search for Ciri. I don't think this is a successful scene for all 3 of the main types of audience. If you're coming from the previous games, then this is a very intoxicating moment, like you're being ushered backstage, dispensed with formalities, and the state of the world is laid bare to you. It's another way this interlude in Vizima Castle manages to be engrossing if you've been playing along and recognize all the developments this world is going through. On some level, you have caused this change, and here's the staging ground for you to go riding through a world of consequences. If you've read the books only, then the teasers about visiting Novigrad and Skellige, which you know from Sapkowski's works, will likely be exciting. This is also another round of the same conflict that was raging in the 5-part book series. If you wanted a game that not just lets you be a Witcher on the path, but also makes you feel like you're doing so in the same war-torn wilderness that Geralt's fellowship wanders through, then this is a welcome promise the game is making to you here, and it's a promise it mostly keeps. However, if you're new, this is a conversation that goes on for just shy of 6 minutes that is absolute nonsense without much in the way of visuals to help show what the hell is going on, and way too much information dumped on you all at once. I think it likely you'll barely care about the map, which for me was the best part. It may still function as a way of communicating the scale of the war going on, but it fails utterly as a teaser and primer for the areas ahead of you, in my opinion. It's something you'll likely enjoy more if you play the game a second time. It's something you'll likely forget everything about when you walk away. There is one interesting note on continuity I want to mention here, the fate of Henselt and how his death in Witcher 2 can change the war currently being fought. What huge ramifications from your choice in the previous game does Witcher 3 have in store about one of the most prominent characters from that game and one of the most important people in the Northern Realms? One dialogue line. If Henselt was already dead, then Radovid used Kedwin's weakened position to his advantage during the winter after Nilfgaard's initial push into the Northern Territories. While the Blackclads were preparing to negotiate their victory come spring, Radovid marched to his eastern ally and conquered it with just a few small skirmishes. Having just lost their strong ruler, who did not have an heir, due to those fertility issues mentioned in the previous game, it does make sense that Radovid could fuse the kingdoms into a united front against the southern invasion. I don't doubt that there would be some attempts at rebellion from Kedwin's nobility after the war was over though, assuming Nilfgaard was fended off. But if Henselt is still alive, instead of a few small disheartening skirmishes, Radovid invades and kills him on the field, in what must have been a presumably much bloodier battle with thousands dying before their king is killed in front of them, and then they all give up and join him? The enemy that just killed their king and slaughtered their comrades? They're instantly unified, like killing a king means you absorb their power, like it's the fucking Santa Claus with Tim Allen? This doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's so clear that I don't have to waste time arguing it either. It's so obvious that the different outcomes involving Henselt from Witcher 2 were too difficult to manage over an entire sequel, so they forced them both to the same results. Again, I wish that the game decided on a canon set of choices to avoid this problem instead of awkwardly trying to make both work with a throwaway line, or for this instance specifically, they could have said that Henselt died on the field trying to capture or defend Upper Edirn from Nilfgaard before they were stopped at the Pontar River. which would fit beautifully with how much he treasured that territory and was obsessed with keeping it, and then Radovid had a kingless ally to attack in winter no matter what. Regardless, this conversation is the proper end of Witcher 3's prologue, and while it doesn't work that effectively at setting the stage for the rest of the game, it does succeed at humanizing Nilfgaard as a war effort. Until now, you may have considered them to be an invincible fighting force that is cutting through the northern kingdoms like a hot silver sword through a monster made of butter. Did I really write that line? You know, whatever, it stays in. Instead, they admit here to having recently taken a huge number of casualties in an unprecedented stalemate with Radovid, and that they're waiting for reinforcements to continue a fight they aren't sure they can win anymore. On a personal level, the ambassador treats you as an equal, has comments that show he genuinely cares about the people in the regions he's speaking about, and has the same complex bundle of opinions on a wide range of topics like anyone else. He's a person. War is hell and full of monsters. It's also full of people. Sometimes it's going to be very difficult to tell which are which. Maybe that's why it's called being a Witcher. Likewise, there's a Gwent player you can challenge in the garden, where you last stood over Jacques de Aldersberg's corpse that reinforces this. Because what's more human than playing a game as a distraction from the sorry state of the world, or watching a really long YouTube video? You can have a final look at the throne room before you go, and also come back here whenever you like. Whether this stays under Nilfgaardian occupation or not will be decided by you throughout the course of this game, but true Temeria cannot rule this castle again at the end. They are a permanent casualty of this war. Witcher 3 begins properly now, and this is also where I'm going to start getting more negative, so hold on to your plushies or whatever the hell this is, because things might get bumpy. Fortunately, we'll be looking at Velen first, which is, in my opinion, the best area in the game overall. Novigrad and Skellige absolutely do some things better, and Velen isn't my favorite location in the game, but when you look at all the pieces that Witcher 3 offers, I think Velen hits the highest average across the board. It might also contain the exception of what I just went through with the ambassador, because if there's anything about that explanation that a newcomer might find sticking out vividly, like a shard of glass under a flashlight on the floor of a dark room, it would be the name, the Bloody Baron.
And Velen is chiefly swampy forests that are difficult to control. We've had several patrols never return to their camps. Thus, we've temporarily delegated authority in this region to a certain Nordling, a former low-ranking officer in the Temerian army, one Philip Strenger, better known by his nom de guerre, the Bloody Baron. I advise you well, avoid him.
This is where the game properly starts.